In this video, I'm going to talk about how defining the issue at stake has a big influence in politics. I use the term issue definition to refer to the political fight about what dimension or issue will be salient during an election or debate or other political contest. Let's start with the example of two completely hypothetical candidates who might be competing against each other in a given election. In the election, those candidates might differ on lots of issues. They might have different positions on gun control, what type of judges should be elected, what the U.S.'s foreign policy should be in regards to military intervention, what the government should do about environmental regulations, healthcare, and many other issues. It is possible that a voter might look at all of these different issues and where the candidates stand, and then they might tally up those positions and choose the candidate who is closest to their preferred policies on the most issues. However, that is not how most of us work. Instead, most of us will reduce the choice down to one issue or dimension that is most important to us at that moment, and will choose the candidate that's closest to us on that issue. You can imagine that there's a voter who, if taxes were the salient issue for them at the moment, then they might vote for the Republican candidate. But if, say, immigration were the most salient issue for them, they would instead vote for the Democratic candidate, or vice versa. The point is that the salience of the issues affects the decisions that voters make. Schatzschneider was a scholar who wrote about this dynamic. Among other things, he wrote that conflicts compete with each other. By conflicts, he means the issue at stake. The group that is successful at defining what issue is at stake is more likely to win the political conflict. We're going to use a simple diagram to help explain this point. So, here's a circle. Think of this circle as a group of voters who are choosing between two candidates in a given election. Now, let's draw a line. Everyone below that line votes for candidate 1, and everyone above that line votes for candidate 2. Maybe this is because they are all voting based on their position on the issue of gun control, and they are simply voting for the person nearest to them. Now, there could have been other issues that would have divided this group in different ways. Here's another line. This line divides voters based on their position on tax and spending levels. Voters below the line vote for candidate 1, and those above the line vote for candidate 2. Notice that in this made-up example, candidate 1 wins if the salient issue in the election is gun control, but candidate 2 wins if the salient issue is tax and spending levels. This is an example of how a new issue can divide an existing coalition and change who wins. We sometimes refer to these issues as wedge issues because they drive a wedge between existing political partners. Fights over what issue is at stake can also change outcomes even when we are looking at the same issue. To illustrate this point, I want to talk about a 2018 ballot proposition in California that dealt with whether the state should repeal a recent gas tax increase. We will have those at the top of the circle representing those who voted to repeal the gas tax, and those at the bottom of the circle being those who voted to keep or not repeal the gas tax. At the time, there were polls that showed that when the salient issue was the tax level, the majority of voters wanted to repeal the gas tax. However, if the salient issue was infrastructure spending that the gas tax would produce, the majority of voters supported keeping the gas tax in place. This illustrates how defining the issue at stake changes the outcome. Let's talk about another example. This one comes from the presidency of George W. Bush. During his presidency, the war in Iraq began. In the days leading up to the start of that conflict, several polls asked Americans if they supported going to war in Iraq. Those polls show that public support for going to war depended on the reason for going into Iraq. If it was about protecting oil, the vast majority of the public opposed the war. If it was about fighting terrorism, the vast majority supported going to war. Defining the issue at stake affects the political outcome. This is why political actors fight so much to define what issues are at stake in each decision and conflict. Finally, remember that it is the losers who work hardest to redefine the issues at stake. The winners don't do this because they are winning under the status quo. It is those on the losing side that need to change things in order to gain power, so they are the ones who work to redefine what issue is at stake. That's it for today's lecture. Keep studying, keep working hard, keep asking questions, and keep safe.